Sir, passengers like you don't usually smell this bad in first class. You need to move. Now! The words sliced through the air like a blade. Everyone turned. The flight attendant's voice didn't falter. Her name tag read Claire, her tone dripping with practiced politeness, barely masking disgust. The two white passengers beside her, an elegant woman in designer sunglasses and a man in a tailored blazer, nodded in agreement, smirking. This was no misunderstanding. It was humiliation, rehearsed and delivered in front of the entire first-class cabin. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that the man they were targeting was Marcus Wright, CEO of one of the most powerful law firms in America. And in just 15 minutes, everything they stood for, this airline, this culture of quiet bias, would come crashing down. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit like to support this story and subscribe for more real-world truths that hold power to account. It was just after 7:00 p.m. at Miami International Airport. The sun was setting outside Gate B12, casting a golden reflection across the tarmac. Inside NovaAir Flight NA247, the cabin buzzed with soft conversations and clinking glasses. Marcus Wright, 50 years old, stood tall in a tailored navy suit, briefcase in hand, boarding pass scanned and cleared. His seat 2A, first class, confirmed, no special favors, no upgrades, just earned status, and $1,728 paid in full. He had boarded quietly, exchanging polite nods with other passengers. His destination, New York City. The purpose, a high-stakes corporate merger that could shape the next decade of American law. But within minutes of taking his seat, Marcus realized something was off. It began with glances. Then, whispers. Olivia Grant, a 42-year-old socialite and longtime NovaAir VIP, twisted her lips in disgust. "Excuse me," she said, wafting the air theatrically. "Something's off over here." Her companion, Ethan Blake, chuckled beside her. "Smells like Coach just got invited to the party." Claire Dubois, a flight attendant in her mid-30s with an air of control she clearly relished, leaned in and lowered her voice. But not low enough. "Sir," she said with a manufactured smile, "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Marcus kept calm, though his jaw tensed. "I am. Seat 2A. Paid. Confirmed." He handed her the ticket. She scanned it and nodded stiffly, but the insult lingered. Claire turned and walked off without another word, only to return moments later with 2 glasses of champagne, which she handed to Olivia and Ethan. Marcus received nothing. "You're not serving me?" he asked. Claire didn't even look at him. "I'll be with you in a moment," she said. But the moment never came. Instead, Olivia leaned in again. "Louder this time, I'm sorry. But he's making us uncomfortable." Ethan joined in, saying, "Is this really what NovaAir allows in first class now?" The tension was thick, the message clear. But this wasn't just about a seat. It was about power, appearance, race, just across the aisle. A young Korean-American woman named Zoe Kim quietly lifted her phone, a food vlogger with a modest but growing following. She knew what she was witnessing wasn't just wrong. It was recordable. Recording. Her screen read. She whispered, "This can't be real." Behind her, Evan Brooks, a marketing consultant returning from a conference, did the same. Within seconds, their posts hit X and TikTok racism on NovaAir flight, first-class passenger harassed over body odor, back at seat 2A. Marcus sat frozen, not because he was unsure of what was happening, but because he'd seen this before, in law, in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, but never like this, never so blatant. Claire returned again, standing stiffly with arms crossed. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please move to economy class. On what grounds? Marcus asked. Voice firm now. We've received passenger complaints, she replied, loud enough for the cabin to hear, concerning your scent. Gasps scattered through the rows. One older gentleman muttered. What the hell is going on? Another woman whispered. This feels wrong. But Claire pressed on. If you refuse, I'll have to notify the pilot. Marcus pulled out his phone. Dialed quickly. Amara, it's me. Prepare the legal documents. Tonight. On the other end. Amara Davis, his executive assistant. Knew what that meant. Understood. Do you want video, names, statements? Marcus said. All of it. Zoe, still recording. Looked across the aisle. Sir, I just posted. It's gaining traction fast. Evan nodded. People are mad. Claire scowled. You two need to put your phones away. We're on public transport. Zoe shot back. We have the right to record. Claire didn't respond. Instead, she disappeared behind the curtain. Moments later, a chilling voice came over the intercom. This is Captain Victor Lang. We have a situation in first class. A passenger has refused to comply with crew instructions. Security has been notified. Olivia clapped once, sarcastically. Finally, she said. Ethan added. Thank you, Captain. First class should feel like first class again. Claire returned, eyes cold. Please stand up. You're being relocated. Marcus remained seated. You're making a mistake, Claire said flatly. You don't belong here. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Zoe's camera caught it all. Evan's video already had over 12,000 views. You've just ruined your airline, Marcus said. Voice steady, measured. We'll see about that. Claire replied. Then the pilot emerged, a tall man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and an air of smug authority. Mr. Wright, he said, as if the name were poison. You've been asked repeatedly to cooperate. Your failure to do so leaves me no choice. You're removing me. You're making my crew and other passengers uncomfortable. Marcus stood, slowly. And that's your justification. Smell. The pilot didn't answer. Marcus turned to Zoe and Evan. Please continue recording. Then, turning back. I want this documented. Claire reached for the intercom again, but Victor held up his hand. Let security handle it. The final insult came with Olivia's closing words. Oh, good. Now it smells better already. Ethan laughed aloud. Claire smirked. Victor walked away. Marcus didn't say another word. But what he would say. In a courtroom, on national television, and in every major financial journal just days later, would leave NovaAir in ruins. 15 minutes. That's all it would take. The cabin hadn't cooled. If anything, the air had gotten thicker, tight with tension, shame, and the feeling that something irreversible had just begun. Claire Dubois, clearly emboldened by the captain's authority and the smirks of the white VIPs, walked back up the aisle and faced the passengers like she was giving instructions for a safety demo. But what she said next turned every head. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced over the intercom, her voice falsely composed. We are experiencing a disturbance in first class. A passenger has refused to comply with crew directives for the comfort and safety of all aboard. We are relocating him to economy. The message wasn't just official. It was accusatory, and everyone knew who she meant. The words echoed across the cabin like a verdict, delivered without trial. Gasps and murmurs followed. Olivia laughed aloud. Finally, someone's cleaning this place up, she said to Ethan, who replied, Can we get a drink to celebrate? Claire smiled, nodded, and returned a moment later with 2 glasses of complimentary wine. Not a word was spoken to Marcus, not even a glance. Instead, she turned to him, placed a folded blanket on the seat beside him like he wasn't even there, and muttered to a nearby flight attendant. He's just doing this for attention. At that, Zoe Kim rose from her seat. Phone still recording? Everyone needs to see this, she said, voice shaky but firm. This is racial profiling, plain and simple. Her post on X read, NovaAir is removing a black man from first class over body odor. He has a valid ticket. This is racism. Hashtag NovaAir exposed. Within minutes. It had over 2,000 impressions. Evan Brooks reposted it on TikTok with a caption that would go viral overnight. Imagine paying for first class only to be kicked out because you're not white enough. He pointed the camera at Marcus, who sat still. Arms crossed. Face unreadable. Sir, Evan asked. Would you like to say anything? Marcus looked into the lens. Just keep recording. And remember this moment. Claire, hearing the exchange, turned around with a raised voice. Phone's down, or we'll be forced to remove more passengers. You'll have to remove me too. Zoe shot back. Around her, other passengers began filming as well. A man in 3C whispered to his wife, I've flown this route for years. I've never seen anything like this. A middle-aged Latina woman leaned forward and quietly said to Marcus, This is wrong. I'm so sorry. But the apology wasn't hers to give. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Victor Lang was muttering into a headset. He's still refusing, he asked. Claire replied, Yes, and now others are filming. They're saying it's discrimination. Of course they are. Victor scoffed. He's weaponizing race. Claire paused. Captain, the posts are gaining traction. Victor frowned. Who's filming? Claire answered. Some influencer. Asian woman. A guy too, Victor hissed. Shut that down before corporate sees it. We'll say it was a safety risk. Say he was aggressive. Claire hesitated. He hasn't been. Then make it sound like he was. Victor snapped. We're not about to let a stunt go viral and drag us through hell. But it was already too late. In the main cabin, Zoe's X post had crossed 5,000 shares. While Evan's TikTok hit 100,000 views, comments poured in, disgusting behavior, sue the airline, I'm never flying NovaAir again. And then, a repost from a verified journalist in New York developing story black CEO allegedly removed from first class over body odor, with no evidence. Videos suggest clear racial bias. A NovaAir under fire. Back in the aisle. Claire walked up to Marcus one final time. Sir, she said coldly, either move voluntarily, or security will be called. Marcus didn't move. He reached for his phone again. Amara, he said calmly. They're preparing to remove me. You have everything ready on the other end. Amara Davis, his assistant and longtime legal strategist, answered. Videos, passenger statements, screenshots from social media. I've already started drafting the complaint. Marcus nodded silently. Claire, clearly thrown by how composed he remained, tried again. You don't seem to understand. We can't let this continue. And you, Marcus said, still seated, don't seem to understand what you've already started. Just behind him, Olivia interrupted, sighing loudly. Can we just get this over with? I paid a lot for peace, not protest. Ethan clapped mockingly. Bravo! I hope they drag you off in cuffs. Claire smirked again. Retreating to the front of the cabin, Zoe caught it on camera. This is what smug racism looks like, she said into her phone. Then posted another update. Victor's voice returned over the intercom. Security has been contacted. We ask all passengers to remain seated and refrain from filming for privacy and safety reasons. The moment he said it, a dozen phones lifted higher. Comments began pouring into Zoe's X post from legal experts, airline watchdogs, and public figures. A retired judge from Atlanta commented, If this goes to court, the airline is finished. A civil rights attorney added, This isn't just bias, it's coordinated public discrimination. They're in trouble. Amara, still on the phone? Asked Marcus. Do you want me to notify the media yet? He waited, watching Claire and Victor whispering behind the curtain again. Not yet, He said, "Let them dig their own grave a little deeper." Claire re-emerged, handing more champagne to Olivia and Ethan. One passenger raised her hand. "Excuse me, are you going to offer anyone else drinks?" Claire waved her off. "They're Nova Elite members," another man in 1D asked. "So am I. Where's mine?" Claire didn't answer. She was unraveling, the power slipping. But she couldn't stop now. Her pride had her locked in. Then came the next wave. Zoe's video now had 25,000 views. Evans had crossed $600,000. The hashtag NovaAir racism was trending. News outlets began emailing Zoe and Evan for permission to use the footage. Claire, finally realizing the storm building around her, turned to Marcus again, not with a smirk this time, but with a stiff jaw. "You're causing a disruption," she said. "You've humiliated yourself." Marcus stood up slowly, not to leave, but to face her. "No," he said. "You've humiliated your company." He stepped into the aisle, turned toward the rest of first class, and said loud enough for the entire section to hear, "Let this be recorded. Let the world see exactly what happens when power is abused, when silence protects discrimination, and when the wrong man gets underestimated." Zoe was crying now, not from fear, but from fury. Evan's hands were trembling as he kept filming. Other passengers nodded, one even muttering, "Damn right." Claire said nothing. Victor's voice over the intercom cut through the moment once more. "Security will be boarding momentarily." And that's when Zoe turned to the camera and said, "I just found out this man is Marcus Wright, CEO of Wright and Associates. This isn't just any passenger. He's one of the most powerful lawyers in the country." That clip, just 15 seconds long, would become the most viewed video on TikTok that month. And the moment it aired, the tide turned. Marcus didn't flinch. But Victor, Claire, Olivia, and Ethan, all pale, all suddenly rattled, realized this wasn't going away. It was only beginning. The cabin had shifted, not just in mood, but in balance. Where moments earlier Marcus Wright stood alone, now something irreversible had begun. The tension that had once hung silently now pressed hard on every side, like a storm ready to break. And it broke the second security boarded. Liam Carter, a white male officer in his late 30s, stepped into the first-class cabin with a hard face and fast gait, his badge clipped to a dark jacket, radio crackling faintly as he scanned the crowd. "Where's the non-compliant passenger?" he barked to Claire. Claire pointed stiffly. "2A! He refuses to move." Liam turned to Marcus, who stood calmly, hands in front of him, as composed as ever. "Sir, we've had reports of disruptive behavior. I'm going to have to ask you to exit the plane." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was disbelief. A man doing absolutely nothing, calm, seated, well-dressed, silent, was being dragged into the center of a manufactured storm. Olivia let out a theatrical sigh. "Thank God," she whispered. Ethan smirked. "There goes the smell," Claire added cruelly. "You had your chance." Liam stepped closer. "Sir, don't make this difficult." Marcus locked eyes with him. "I'll go peacefully, but I want everyone to keep filming." Zoe was already filming, Evan too. A couple in row 1A held up their phones, one whispering, "We're with you." That mattered, not just to Marcus, but to history. Claire didn't stop. She turned to the cabin. "Apologies for the disruption. We'll begin drink service once this issue is resolved." Her voice was icy. Victor Lang, the pilot, didn't come out from the cockpit, but his voice filtered through the speakers like poison. "We thank you for your patience as we remove a non-compliant guest. Your safety is our top priority." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Safety? You're removing me for Odor. And now it's safety." Zoe shouted toward the cockpit. "You're lying and we have it all on camera." Claire flinched, Passengers murmured. Evan added, TikTok is blowing up. 1 million views already. Hashtag NovaAir racism is trending. Liam grabbed Marcus by the arm. Firm, not rough, but public. Let's walk. Sir. Marcus didn't resist. But as they reached the aisle, Claire leaned in with a final humiliation. You'll never fly first class again. Marcus didn't answer. He turned to the cabin and said only one thing. Remember this moment. They walked slowly, Liam leading him past rows of stunned passengers. Phones raised. Some whispered. Others just watched in frozen disbelief. As he passed Zoe, she lowered her phone briefly and whispered, I'm so sorry. He gave her a nod. A silent thank you, Evan whispered. This isn't over. Behind them. Claire returned to Olivia and Ethan, pouring them more champagne. Finally, Olivia said, This is what we pay for. Claire laughed, actually laughed, and said, Some people just don't understand their place. That moment would be heard on multiple live streams. The words would become infamous. Outside the plane, down the metal stairs onto the tarmac. Marcus breathed in the humid night air. He didn't speak. Not yet. But Amara, on the other end of the call, was already collecting footage, archiving posts, and cross-referencing NovaAir's history of prior incidents. We file tomorrow, she said. And we bring the full weight of the law, Marcus finally responded. Make sure the world sees it all. Back in the cabin, something was shifting again. A woman named Carla in Seat 1C turned to Claire. This isn't right, she said. You just kicked out a paying customer for nothing, Claire replied sharply. We acted within protocol, Carla snapped back. I'm a lawyer. No, you didn't. Another man stood. What did he even do? Claire repeated the lie. We had complaints of an odor. He refused to cooperate, Zoe yelled. That's a lie you never investigated, never checked, just assumed. Because of how he looks. A ripple went through the rows. The mood had changed. Claire's control was slipping. Victor's voice returned. Sharp, annoyed. Everyone needs to be seated so we can depart. But now passengers weren't listening. They were organizing. Zoe and Evan had formed a small group near the galley. We have to post everything, Zoe said. Not just what happened, but who did it, and how they tried to cover it. They began tagging media outlets, civil rights groups, legal foundations. Evan's TikTok post had already crossed 2.2 million views. Dozens of legal experts were reposting it, demanding NovaAir respond. Rachel Cohen, a retired federal judge, reposted it with one word, unacceptable. Back on the tarmac. Marcus sat in a private waiting area. His face didn't show anger. It showed calculation, experience. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who had argued before federal courts, won billion-dollar cases, and dismantled systemic discrimination brick by brick. He wasn't going to scream or cry or beg for public sympathy. He was going to take them apart. Legally, financially, publicly. Tomorrow, he told Amara, we'll deliver a message. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Victor Lang was finally looking at his phone, the posts, the mentions, the firestorm. His face paled. Claire knocked on the door. Captain, she said. It's going viral, Victor replied. They'll forget. These things blow over. But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction, Claire added. One of them said he's the CEO of a major law firm. Victor frowned. Which one Claire didn't know. But it didn't matter. Because a few rows back, Zoe had just posted another clip. Marcus, calmly saying, You're destroying NovaAir. That one line would be quoted in headlines for weeks. Evan pulled up the firm's website. Wright and Associates. He said aloud, $15 billion in managed litigation. He's that Marcus Wright. Zoe's jaw dropped. Oh my God. She added a new caption to her latest post. This isn't just racism. This is the CEO of a top U.S. law firm being kicked out over fake odor claims. This is career suicide for NovaAir. Within 10 minutes, the post reached over 1 million views. The passengers began to murmur louder. They messed with the wrong guy. Wait, he's a lawyer NovaAir's done for. Claire, still at the front, was sweating now, not from heat, but from fear. Olivia looked suddenly uncomfortable. Ethan, pale. The pilot stayed silent. And then, just as the crew tried to restore order, Zoe stood up once more. She faced the cabin with her phone high and said clearly, Marcus Wright was kicked out of this cabin. Not for smell, not for any disruption, but because of racism, because the people running this plane thought he didn't belong. She turned the camera toward Claire. Is that what you believe? Claire stared back, silent. Tell the world. Claire, look into this camera and say he didn't belong. Claire said nothing, and that silence roared louder than anything she could have said. One row back, a woman began to clap, then another, then a man. And in seconds, half the cabin was applauding, not for drama, but for the man who was gone, for Marcus, for what he represented, and for what he was about to do next. The next few minutes unfolded like a courtroom drama on a jet bridge. Marcus Wright, still standing at the edge of the tarmac, looked up at the NovaAir jet that had just ejected him as if he were the threat. A man in a $1,000 suit, carrying no more than a leather briefcase and decades of experience dismantling injustice, was now alone beneath the humming aircraft lights. But inside his silence was a storm. The door had shut behind him, but the world had just opened its eyes. Above him, passengers continued to film through oval windows. Zoe Kim's live stream had crossed 3.8 million views. Evan Brooks's TikTok had passed 6.1 million. The caption now read, Passenger dragged off NovaAir flight for body odor. Turns out he's the black CEO of a 15B law firm. Comment sections exploded. Fire the crew. Sue the airline. This is a civil rights case waiting to happen. One post read, They targeted the wrong man. Watch what he does next. And they were right. Because Marcus wasn't just leaving that plane. He was preparing to take down the entire system that had allowed this to happen. He reached for his phone. Amara, he said evenly. File the complaint. I want it drafted and submitted by morning. Include the videos, the names, everything. On the other end, Amara Davis was already ahead of him. I've secured Zoe's footage and Evan's posts. They've both agreed to testify if needed. She paused. Marcus, this is going to explode. Marcus looked out at the night sky. Good. Back inside the cabin. The atmosphere was no longer celebratory. Claire stood rigid, her earlier smirk erased by the reality of what had just occurred. Olivia and Ethan sat quieter now, their posture still smug, but their expressions uneasy. In the first-class galley, another attendant whispered. We're trending, Claire snapped. Don't talk about it. But it was too late. Passengers were openly discussing the posts. He's a civil rights lawyer, one said. He's won against the federal government before, another added. I just followed Zoe. She's everywhere right now. Claire gripped the counter, jaw clenched. She turned to pour more drinks, but her hand trembled slightly. Meanwhile, Marcus, now in a quiet lounge in the terminal, had switched gears. A legal filing was already being typed by his team. The name at the top, Marcus Wright v. NovaAir Corporation. Allegation racial discrimination, public humiliation, defamation, emotional distress, supporting evidence, multiple first-hand passenger accounts, social media video with timestamps, and internal airline policy contradictions. Amara, pacing behind her laptop, said, Rachel Cohen at the Tribunal is chairing cases next week, Marcus replied. Good. She knows our work. He then dictated a brief public statement to be released in the morning. No individual should be judged by appearance or denied service because of who they are. My team and I are pursuing justice not just for me, but for every silent voice denied a seat they rightfully earned. Back on the plane, several passengers began raising formal complaints. "I'd like to speak with someone." One man said to Claire, "That was unacceptable." Another woman demanded to know if the airline had a discrimination reporting line. Claire deflected. "Please take your seats." Zoe turned to Evan. "This is bigger than just a TikTok now," Evan replied. "I've had 4 reporters DM me already. CNN wants the footage." Just then, Zoe's phone buzzed. A lawyer from a non-profit group had messaged, "Please connect us with Mr. Wright. We'd like to assist in the filing." That night, Marcus met with Amara and 3 attorneys from his firm over video call. They reviewed timelines, statements, and media coverage. The narrative was clear. "They targeted you based on race." One of the attorneys said, "They constructed a false reason, Odor, to justify removal. It was public. It was recorded. The damage is undeniable," Amara added. They laughed. They served drinks to the accusers. Claire mocked him. The pilot fabricated non-compliance. Marcus's voice was calm, but iron-edged. And they did it in front of the world. By 7:00 a.m. the next morning, July 11th, the lawsuit had been filed. A press release followed shortly after, published across major wire services and shared by every news outlet covering aviation, discrimination, or corporate accountability. CNN ran the headline, "Black CEO Sues NovaAir Over Public Humiliation on Flight NA247. The Guardian posted passenger removed for odor was legal giant. Now the airline faces its reckoning. Social media buzzed. Hashtag Justice for Marcus climbed trending charts. Lawyers weighed in. Civil rights leaders condemned the incident. And by midday, the NovaAir PR team had gone into full crisis mode. But the damage was done. In the cabin of Flight NA247, the news broke before they even landed in New York. A man 2 rows behind Olivia read the headline aloud. "Oh my God, he's suing. Already." Olivia stiffened. Ethan glanced at Claire, who now sat on a jump seat, pale. A passenger stood and shouted, "You all better lawyer up. This is going to court." Claire tried to keep her composure, but even the co-pilot stopped her as she approached the cockpit. "They're talking about this on the ground. It's not going away," Claire whispered. "We followed procedure." The co-pilot didn't answer. When the plane landed, passengers filed off in silence. No applause, no goodbyes, just tension. Zoe and Evan were approached by ground staff who'd seen the footage and whispered support. Zoe looked into the camera and said quietly, "The world just watched NovaAir make the worst mistake possible, and they did it thinking no one would care." As Marcus sat in his office later that evening, Amara handed him a folder. Inside was a printed stack of viral posts, legal documents, and media coverage. She said, "It's done. The tribunal has received the case. 3 judges have confirmed the date." Marcus nodded. "Then they'll see the truth." She hesitated. "They're trying to reach a settlement." He didn't hesitate, declined. And as the sun dipped over the Miami skyline that evening, NovaAir's worst nightmare had just begun. By the morning of July 17th, the tribunal courtroom in downtown Miami was packed, not just with lawyers, but with journalists, former passengers from Flight NA247 and civil rights observers from across the country. The case Marcus Wright v. NovaAir Corporation had become the nation's newest legal flashpoint. The 3 tribunal judges, Rachel Cohen, a respected former federal justice, Malik Johnson, a constitutional law expert, and Elena Ruiz, a seasoned civil rights advocate, entered the room with solemn expressions. The press flashed cameras as Marcus Wright stood calmly in front of the panel, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, no tie, his stance deliberate, controlled. Behind him, Amara Davis sat beside their legal team, flanked by 2 laptops and a binder stacked with printed transcripts, witness statements, and stills from TikTok and X. Judge Cohen opened the session. "We are here to hear arguments related to a complaint filed by Mr. Marcus Wright against NovaAir, alleging racial discrimination, public humiliation, and emotional harm during boarding procedures on Flight NA 247. The hearing began, and so did the reckoning. Marcus spoke first, not as a victim pleading for sympathy, but as a man presenting facts. "I was removed from an aircraft for a fabricated claim of body odor, despite holding a valid ticket, wearing business attire, and remaining seated the entire time. The basis of my removal, as recorded by multiple passengers, was rooted not in behavior, but in assumption, racial assumption." His voice didn't waver. The humiliation was deliberate, the motive was clear, and the consequences should be real. Judge Johnson leaned forward, visibly moved. Amara cued the first video, Zoe Kim's live stream, projected onto a screen beside the judges. The footage played. Claire's smirking face, the champagne handed to Olivia and Ethan, the line, "You don't belong in first class." Audible gasps filled the room. Next came Evan Brooks's TikTok the moment Marcus was escorted out. The final words he said to the camera, "Remember this moment." The tribunal watched every second. Then came witness testimony. Zoe testified in person. He did nothing wrong. The accusations were baseless. Claire mocked him. The pilot fed the lie, and when people objected, the crew doubled down. Evan followed. This wasn't confusion. This was coordinated, and they didn't expect anyone to record it. Claire Dubois was called to testify but appeared via video, her face pale, under questioning. She admitted to receiving no written passenger complaint about Marcus's odor. She stammered. "It was based on verbal feedback," Judge Ruiz asked pointedly. "Was that feedback documented?" Claire replied. "Was Mr. Wright disruptive?" "No." He remained seated. Then came the silence. Claire's eyes lowered as she said, "I was following orders." The courtroom paused as Victor Lang, the pilot, took the stand. His attorney read a pre-written statement, citing crew discretion and safety protocols, but under cross-examination, Victor slipped. When asked why Marcus was targeted over body odor without medical verification or any evidence, he replied, "It was a call made based on comfort." "Comfort for whom?" asked Judge Cohen. Victor couldn't answer. The silence was damning. Amara rose and presented internal airline chat logs obtained through discovery. An internal crew message from Claire to Victor, minutes before removal. "Red passenger in 2A, already getting looks. Want me to ask for ID?" A follow-up from Victor replied, "Yeah, keep that cabin tight. If he resists, we've got protocol." The courtroom shifted. The bias wasn't accidental. It was embedded. A NovaAir HR manager, called by subpoena, revealed under oath that Victor Lang had been the subject of 3 prior complaints by minority passengers. None investigated. Olivia and Ethan were not present. Legal counsel submitted a statement that they were unavailable, but passengers from the flight had already testified to their behavior. Amara submitted a final document, a printout of the social media firestorm, showing 87 million combined views, 45,000 comments, and 19 formal complaints to the FAA citing NovaAir's discriminatory practices. Judge Ruiz looked at her fellow panelists, then addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Wright, your testimony and supporting evidence reflect not only personal harm, but a pattern that endangers public trust," Judge Johnson added. "This tribunal finds substantial merit in your claim." The verdict was swift. Rachel Cohen read the ruling aloud. NovaAir is found liable for racial discrimination, public humiliation, and the violation of service integrity. The court awards Mr. Marcus Wright $30 million in compensatory damages. mandates a formal public apology by NovaAir's executive leadership, and recommends immediate regulatory review of its crew policies. The room held its breath. Then applause broke out. Zoe hugged Evan. A woman from the audience wept silently. Reporters scrambled to update headlines. CNN posted Marcus Wright wins $30 million in landmark discrimination case against NovaAir. Later that afternoon, a press conference was held outside the courthouse. Marcus stood at the podium, flanked by Amara and members of his legal team. His voice was steady. This case was never about money. It was about truth, about what happens when someone is stripped of dignity because of skin color, while holding a valid seat, a paid ticket, and years of earned respect. He continued, "Let this case remind every airline, every company, and every citizen. There are consequences for unchecked bias." Behind him, the NovaAir executive team, led by CEO James Harper, released a statement on live camera. Harper, visibly shaken, read, "We extend our deepest apologies to Mr. Wright for the treatment he endured aboard Flight NA247. This behavior does not reflect the values we claim to uphold. Immediate steps are being taken to retrain our staff and review crew decision-making protocols." Claire was formally suspended. Victor Lang was banned from flying for the airline pending FAA investigation. Liam Carter, the security officer, issued a public apology. "I was wrong to act without full understanding. I apologize to Mr. Wright and everyone watching." But the damage was spreading. Other passengers who had previously flown with NovaAir began sharing similar stories. A class action lawsuit began to form. Major news outlets ran full-hour specials. NovaAir's stock plummeted 42% in 36 hours. Marcus, in a quiet moment with Amara later that evening, sat back and said simply, "We've only just begun." She nodded. "The system is watching now," he replied. "Good. Let them." The collapse of NovaAir wasn't a slow unraveling. It was a free-fall. By the morning of July 18th, less than 24 hours after the tribunal's ruling, the airline's stock had dropped another 38%, leaving investors scrambling and corporate board members in emergency meetings. Headlines from every major outlet flashed across television screens and news feeds. NovaAir lawsuit triggers Wall Street panic, racism verdict rocks aviation industry, and airline stock in nosedive after 30 Malheurs tribunal loss. International media picked up the story as well, with the BBC calling it a global wake-up call to systemic bias in travel. Within hours, travel bloggers, influencers, and activists across platforms began urging their followers to boycott the airline. While screenshots of Zoe Kim's live stream and Evan Brooks's TikTok flooded feeds worldwide, in one post that gained over 10 million views on X, Zoe wrote, "This wasn't just one man. It's every black traveler who's ever been side-eyed for walking into the wrong cabin." The message hit home. By midday, the NovaAir board had called a press conference, during which interim spokesperson Cynthia Rowe shakily confirmed what many had already predicted as of today. NovaAir has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. "We are halting all outbound flights by 6 p.m. this evening. We deeply regret the pain caused and acknowledge the tribunal's decision." The airline, once valued at nearly $9 billion, had evaporated almost overnight. Not from market shifts or mechanical failures, but from a single act of discrimination made visible by the internet and vindicated by the law. But the reckoning wasn't over. That same afternoon, Liam Carter, the security officer who had physically escorted Marcus Wright off Flight NA247, gave an exclusive interview to a local Miami news affiliate. His face was drawn, his expression heavier than before. "When I stepped on that plane," he said, "I was told there was a disruption. I trusted the crew, but I never saw a threat." He was calm, respectful. It didn't sit right. When asked why he followed through, Liam hesitated. because I've been trained to defer to authority on that aircraft. But now I see I was part of something bigger, something wrong. His admission spread just as quickly as the original videos. In response, civil rights groups praised his honesty while pointing to it as proof of how unchecked authority can quietly enable injustice. That same day, a whistleblower within NovaAir's internal HR department leaked confidential emails revealing that Victor Lang, the pilot, had not only received multiple bias-related complaints in the past 5 years, but that several had been quietly resolved without formal investigation. One email, dated March, read Lang has been advised to avoid further escalation in first-class conflict situations, particularly involving non-white passengers. The email's recipient, Claire Dubois, within hours. The FAA announced it was opening a broader investigation into NovaAir's hiring, training, and passenger complaint procedures. Marcus's legal team issued a new statement calling for immediate federal oversight into racial discrimination protocols across all U.S. airlines. Amara Davis, appearing on CNN's evening broadcast, declared, "We're not just closing the door on NovaAir, we're opening one for accountability across an entire industry." The comment was echoed across networks. The New York Times editorial board published a Sunday column titled, "The Flight That Changed Everything," and across TikTok, creators began sharing stories under the trending tag hashtag #IWasProfiled2, recounting their own encounters with biased airline staff. Marcus, meanwhile, remained measured, refusing television interviews and issuing only a brief written comment. This isn't personal revenge. This is about rebuilding trust where it's been broken for too long. But behind the scenes, the movement was gaining momentum. By Monday morning, the Department of Transportation had announced a new task force to review racial equity in air travel. Major carriers including Delta, United, and Emirates issued public statements distancing themselves from NovaAir and pledging to revise their internal training programs. United Airlines CEO personally reached out to Marcus Wright to request a private consultation. The pressure was undeniable, and so was the legacy already forming. NovaAir, once a symbol of elite travel, had become a case study in corporate failure born not of financial mismanagement or safety errors, but of arrogance, bias, and the false belief that dignity could be dismissed at 35,000 feet. 3 months later, by October, the airline industry had begun to look noticeably different. NovaAir no longer existed, its name scrubbed from terminals, its website shut down, its remaining assets quietly auctioned off to competitors. But the imprint it left was unmistakable. What had started as one man being told he didn't belong in first class had triggered one of the most consequential reckonings in modern aviation, across the U.S. and beyond. Airlines scrambled to implement sweeping reforms. Delta, United, Emirates, and several others launched new anti-discrimination departments. FAA regulations were updated to include mandatory bias training for all airline staff, and a new federal hotline was created specifically for racial profiling in air travel. But the most significant change wasn't policy. It was cultural. Passengers had seen what happened to Marcus Wright, and they had watched it unfold in real time. The public was no longer willing to accept silence or vague apologies. A video of Marcus being escorted off flight NA-247 had become an emblem, a symbol of how discrimination hides in routine, and how accountability can arrive with a camera and a courtroom. Marcus, for his part, had quietly returned to work. The $30 million judgment had been donated in full to launch the Wright Aviation Justice Fund, a non-profit legal initiative offering pro bono representation to victims of travel discrimination and funding training reform for airlines worldwide. The story had become the subject of op-eds, university case studies, and even a pending documentary. When asked during a rare interview with PBS NewsHour why he chose not to take the money, Marcus replied, "Because I already had power. What I needed was to give it back to those who didn't. He now served as an advisor on the FAA's new Equity and Flight Council, which drafted ongoing guidelines for diversity and passenger rights enforcement. Amara Davis, his longtime executive assistant, had been promoted to chief counsel of the nonprofit and regularly testified before Congress on institutional bias. Zoe Kim and Evan Brooks, whose videos helped ignite the entire movement, had used their platforms to spotlight other stories of silent discrimination. On subways, in lobbies, in classrooms, both were awarded by the NAACP for civic courage through digital witness. By late October, the hashtag #IWasProfiled2 had generated more than 400 million impressions. Thousands shared their own stories, some decades old, many recent, about being judged before speaking, questioned before sitting, removed before being heard. But alongside the pain came progress. Airports across the country began installing anonymous bias report kiosks. Training videos now included actual footage from the NovaAir case, with Marcus's calm refusal to surrender his dignity used as an example of non-disruptive protest in the face of bias. Even high school textbooks began mentioning the case under civil rights curriculum updates. What had once been an isolated incident at 7:00 p.m. in a Miami first-class cabin was now an institutional touchstone. In a final public statement released on the anniversary of the flight, 3 months to the day, Marcus wrote, "I never planned to become a headline. I didn't ask for it, but I also didn't walk away from it. To those who feel they don't belong in places of power, comfort, or opportunity, let this remind you you do. You always have. Sometimes the world just needs proof." The statement was shared by world leaders, activists, educators, and CEOs alike. It was posted in break rooms, boardrooms, and classrooms across America. It was even etched on a bronze plaque newly installed at Miami International Airport, beneath a portrait of Marcus Wright, calm, composed, briefcase in hand, walking alone across the tarmac, but never again unseen. Thank you for watching. Marcus Wright's story wasn't just about a flight. It was about dignity, justice, and lasting change. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. We can't change the past, but together, we can shape a better future.